welcome to Decoding Devy. I am Brandon Hay, and you can find me on Twitter at HeyB3. And we are brought to you by the IDP Guys YouTube channel. And I'm glad that we have our first returning guest today, Matt Bruening from Campus to Canton. So he graciously is coming on, and we're going to talk NIL and the conference realignment. So we'll go ahead and get into it. Thank you, Matt, for joining.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to be back on, get to hang out a little bit. I know I don't know what exactly you were sending me. You haven't told me yet. You just said it's in the mail, so I'm extremely excited to find out what my prize is for being the one returning guest. I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, that's going to be in the mail. It might be the snail mail, but you'll get
That's
it
all right.
eventually.
As long as it's not like a JJ McCarthy shirt or something like that, I'll be very happy with whatever shows up.
Fair. So we'll get into the NIL stuff. Just generally, I know the NCAA was trying to scale back the some sort of regulations. I just don't think they can put it back in the box now because everything's out now. What do you think about that? Do you think they could put regulations on this?
I don't, and I think there will be some regulations coming at some point. I think a lot of that is going to come down to what we're going to talk about later in this episode with a lot of the conference realignment stuff. I think a lot of the reason that is happening as well is to get away from the NCAA. They clearly have not just fumbled the bag here, they've done it throughout a lot of their history. And I don't think there's a way for them to do it. They've constantly, I believe, even come out and said that they want the government to do something, but they want Congress to step in and set something so they don't have to do it. And I just don't think that they are. Congress seems very willing and very happy with just saying, nope, it's going to be based on your state and what your state wants. So I don't think that there's going to be any real regulations right now. I do think we'll see some kind of market set within the next year. So just based on the payments we've quote unquote heard about right now, and then possibly how those players do on the field next year, maybe some people will not be willing to pay as much as we've heard now. But as of now, I am with you. I just don't see how the NCAA can come in and do practically anything.
Right. And just go over a few things that have happened that I haven't really gotten to talk about, the whole Saban and Jimbo thing. So I don't understand, why is Jimbo so mad because it's legal to pay players? Is he just trying to make this reputational type thing that kids just want to come play for him?
I'm not really sure what Jimbo's angle is. I think some of it may be the fact that, the talk is they've spent, I honestly don't remember the exact number. I find a lot of this stuff just kind of funny to listen to these guys get so upset about, but let's just say it's $25 million right now. If you have this floating out there that Jimbo Fisher has spent, $25 million to secure all these recruits, if you're the top running back recruit that's going to Texas A&M and you find out that you're only getting paid $500,000 and there's only say 6 other guys that have come in with you, and all of a sudden it's, well, wait a minute. I'm being told by the media and Nick Saban that my coach here spent $25 million on this recruiting class and I'm only getting $500,000. Where's the other $24 million and $500,000 going? So I really do think that's a big thing for Jimbo, because he's not necessarily come out and refuted that they're doing anything NIL wise. He's always just kind of said that's not the number. We're not paying people $25 million. I really think that's the big part about it. Is I don't think he wants a number out there, because I imagine, even though we know in this world, in any sports and really in anything, it's very much a meritocracy. Not always everybody's not on the same pay scale, right? Like if you're hiring quarterback, if you're Patrick Mahomes, you're going to make more money than my guy Baker Mayfield. It just is what it is. That's the world we live in. Patrick Mahomes is better. But we haven't really, as I just mentioned earlier, seen that kind of level set in the college football universe. So you may think, hey, if I'm the top running back, wide receiver, lineman, linebacker, whatever it is going to Texas A&M, you still want to get your high end of the deal, whatever that may end up being. And then if you come to find out Connor Weigman is making $7 million again, but you only made $200,000, you may be kind of wondering well, what the hell is going on here kind of thing. So I think that's the big thing, is he doesn't want that figure out there, because then these guys can start putting together possibly who's making what and why am I not making more.
That's a fair point. I've never really thought about that part. And then the Saban part, does he really think that, like, everyone's naive enough to think that Bama players hadn't been getting paid all these years? I mean, I don't know what his point was about it too. He's always, Bama's finding ways to get around rules too. And I don't know, it was just very hypocritical, I thought, for Saban. And I think it's kind of funny that both of them, because I think both of them skate around rules, and it's just very interesting to me that it kind of came out that way.
Yeah, I do think a lot of these coaches don't, even though I guess we can't say we know for sure that it happens, right? Like we believe that they have always, not just Alabama, you can use Ohio State. I feel like most schools. I'm constantly told by good friend Felix Sharp that Michigan would never break any rules. So I don't know about Michigan, but I'm pretty sure all these other schools have skirted some rule here or there to bring in a recruit. On Saban's side of things, I actually kind of feel for Nick Saban a little bit, which is not something I typically say. As much as I respect the man, I truly despise him because of his success. And I want to know, what or who, if it was the devil or somebody else that he made a deal with to be the successful, and if he could just send them my way, because I'm good with selling my soul to have the success that Nick Saban's had. I think his thing is, and something that I think should be pointed out is, we should not have ever heard what Nick Saban said. That was at I forgot what they call it. Now the word has jumped out of my head, but it's when a lot of those guys come in there. They're all part of the group. It's like an alumni kind of thing, an alumni kind of meeting. And he's saying that to boosters. He's saying that to Alabama boosters. That wasn't a TV crew. There was not supposed to be any cameras or anything. Of course, that was just someone who decided to pull their phone out and record Nick Saban, and then they released it. I think Nick Saban was saying that more to get Alabama's boosters into the, hey, you guys need to start giving us a little bit more money, because we got Texas A&M over here paying, again, we're just going to use the number $25 million to get this recruiting class, and I'm only getting $4 million for our guys on NIL. Like, we need to step it up. On him not admitting any of that other stuff, I do think it's hard for coaches, especially now, to admit that they broke the rules then, just because they want everyone to believe they were doing it the right way. Even again, we all believe it was probably happening. You probably don't want to admit that out loud, even though I don't know what the statute of limitations are at this point with the NCAA. I don't know how any of that works. I mean, at one point in life there, you could not have cream cheese on a bagel and you could get suspended. So I don't know how that works.
Yeah, I could see that. And to the Michigan part, I don't think they pay players nearly as much as other schools, but I have heard stories about when Lloyd Carr was there, how some of the money was getting spent. But yeah, that's interesting about that. And I do want to say, I don't respect a lot that comes out of Columbus, but I do respect Ryan Day being honest, coming out and saying, you need $2 million for the quarterbacks, you need $1 million for these edge. We need $12 million to put out a competitive team, which I think that's a little overstated. They're still going to put out a competitive team, but I get what he's saying. But I like the transparency where he's trying to, get all the boosters and everything, like you said, to pony up because they want to win.
Yeah, I mean, look, Ryan Day's a good guy. Let's just be honest here. He's different than Urban, who I personally am not even that big a fan of. I do like what Ryan Day has come out and said. Again, he's been probably one of the coaches who's been the most honest about this stuff. Now that I think a lot of that too is Ohio State. Something we were talking about right before we jumped on here was they don't have like massive boosters like Miami and Florida. We call them the crypto ballers. I think we got these guys in crypto who are like funding everything in Miami, as we've heard. Ohio State, while a very big alumni base and a very big school, doesn't necessarily have like those high-end boosters. So they're relying on probably more of like a crowdsource funding thing in a way. And I think that's why he's being very open and honest about that. I know he had a meeting when a lot of that stuff came out with a lot of like business owners and everything else, because they want to be able to field a competitive team. And I think he realizes as well, like, not necessarily that this is what you have to do to win and compete now in this new era of college football, but it's also just what's expected. These players now want to make money. They finally earned that right. They should have earned that right a long time ago. But for whatever reason, that is happening now with NIL. And Ryan Day knows, like, hey, look, if we want to have these players here, we're going to have to find a way to pay him. And so I do find the numbers that he said fairly intriguing, especially like the 2 million part for a top quarterback, because we've kind of seen in the past couple quote unquote rumors of the latest quarterbacks that have signed have been a lot more than $2 million a year. Now, maybe a school like Ohio State doesn't have to pay. I don't want to, we'll just say, I don't want to give the exact number because it's kind of been refuted, but like Jaden Rashada, who just committed to Miami, the reports are he's getting paid a lot more than $2 million. I'll just put it that way. Maybe Ohio State doesn't have to pay that much because it is Ohio State and they're still considered one of the better colleges. So you still can kind of put that in like, hey, we're a playoff team. We're national championship contender every year. So you don't have to pay as much. But I just find it very interesting. And I do like what you said. I do think that I'm appreciative of someone on the other side of things, quote unquote media, however you want to put it, that he's willing to be that open and honest about, hey, this is what we're looking to pay players, this is what we think we need to put a competitive team on the field.
Yeah, and two things on response to that. Why do you think he was like no one really came out against him when he said those numbers? And two, do you think it's ever going to be published how much these players are getting, or do you think it's going to be kept secret, like not like salaries, in pro sports?
I think it'll probably become public if they do end up going to what I expect into this almost kind of semi-professional model that I think is coming with all this conference realignment and everything. The reason I think he said it is I just think he's always kind of been a very open and honest coach to the point that you can be open and honest, I guess. I don't I don't know him personally, but just from the people that I do know in that area, in that program, like they've always said, he's a very open and honest guy. And I think they held that meeting again because I know James Franklin kind of said if I can't remember what he said, he kind of shot back at that a little bit, but like outside of the media, I think maybe it's because of what you just said. Like he's one of the only coaches who's come out and said, well, this is what we're doing, where you have Jimbo Fisher and all these guys saying, oh, we're not paying anybody. They're just coming to Texas A&M for the great, just great education. It's just a great school. Like, at least he's being honest and open about it, right? And they've already reported stuff as well. Last year, like Stroud was making, I think it was $600,000 if I'm remembering correctly. He's got, I think, like $1 million NIL deal. He also gets like a new car every 3 months. And Alabama's come out and admitted some of theirs too. With Bryce Young gets like $1 million base on some of that stuff. So I think that's what it is. Is just Ryan Day has been honest and open about it to a point. Like he hasn't said exact numbers, but he's been like, this is what we think we want to do to field a competitive team, instead of just hiding behind no, we're Ohio State. We're in the playoffs. As I said, national championship team. We don't have to pay players. Cause I think he could say that. And much like Saban could say that, that's more believable than, no offense, Jimbo Fisher saying that at Texas A&M, because they haven't done anything. Like there's very few schools I think they could just come out and say, Dabo at Clemson as well, who's also actually been surprisingly very open and honest about, hey, we want to pay the players, but we got to figure out a good way to do that. There's a very few schools, in my opinion, that could come out and say, hey, we're not paying players that much. We're doing it because we're a great program, this, and that. And I feel like Day is one of them.
Okay, yeah. And we actually texted about this, so I'm going to word this differently than I probably was before. Reuben Owens, the number one running back, committed to Louisville out of Texas. So it was a surprise for a lot of people because usually Louisville doesn't get those type of recruits. I did see some parts where he said he wanted to build his own, kind of story, not go to school, which is, fine. There have been rumors about, there's some NIL money there. So, but based on that, do you think some of these schools like that might have a pretty big, alumni base are going to start, pulling all their money and trying to get one of those big recruits, knowing they can't get a lot of them like Alabama, Texas A&M, and getting that one big recruit, hoping that they can kind of carry that team? Do you think that might happen more often now?
I do, for the most part. I do think there's a shot that this kind of spreads some of the wealth. I still think the top programs, and we've seen it again, this year with Ohio State, at least when it comes to the wide receiver bar. Like, we still got all these wide receivers, like, probably going to make some NIL money, but they're all going to Ohio State. I think a lot of that is the Brian Hartline effect. I also think for Louisville, they have been, I think a lot of this may be Pierce Clarkson, so I don't want to throw all of this on the NIL deal. He's one of the top quarterbacks in the nation. He's done a really good job of recruiting. He committed to Louisville early. I don't know if I don't remember there being any real NIL rumors about him. I'm sure he's getting something. I feel like he's probably been the reason that they recruited a Reuben Owens. They also got DeAndre Moore, one of the top wide receivers as well. But I do think this will spread out the wealth a little bit. Like, when you're looking at it, a Reuben Owens, as you just mentioned, one of the top running back in the nation, like, why would you go at the other team that a lot of people thought he was going to go to is Texas, right? Well, you got Bijan, who's going to play this year. You're not playing over him. You got Jonathan Brooks, who's looked really good this current spring season heading into now the fall football season. You also have Jadon Blue, who was a top recruit last year. There's a realistic shot, Reuben Owens, you're not seeing in the field for a couple of years. Like, yeah, I'm just throwing a number out there. This has not been reported, or this is what he's getting. Let's just say he's going to get $1 million, kind of based on what Ryan Day was saying earlier, right? You just going to take the $1 million to go to Texas because it's a big school, or do you take let's just say everybody's offering the same amount, or do you take the $1 million to go to Louisville and get playing time right away as well, which only increases your value? You can probably get more NIL deals or anything like that while you're there. And that also increases your chance to go to the draft, especially for a running back. I do think a lot of these lower teams are going to be able to get players. Miami with Jaden Rashada, again, we just talked about earlier. Reports are he's getting a pretty big NIL deal. I think Miami probably had to pay up a little bit more than another team, a higher or better team would, to get a quarterback like Jaden Rashada is highly ranked in the recruiting services ranks that he is, because they're like, well, while you are a big name school for the most part in Miami, you haven't really done much on the field the past couple of years, so you're going to have to pay me to come there. Now, how does that affect these schools and players if it doesn't work out in the future is kind of the big question, because this is the first time we've seen anything like this on the college side of things. If Jaden Rashada doesn't work out, there's a lot of people who think Emory Williams, who also committed to Miami like 3 days before Rashada did, could end up being the better quarterback if he ends up beating out Rashada or ends up playing more. Like, I have heard that there are actually contracts with these NIL deals and stipulations in there, like you can't be out after a certain point. Sorry, I almost went down a very bad road there. Out a certain point in time, you can't bring bad news or bad light onto the school. You have to hit certain things. Now, we don't know any of this to be fact yet, because none of us have seen an actual NIL deal or contract. It's all rumors and in your window. If that is true, then I do think that that'll be a little bit better, because if, say, Jaden Rashada is not playing well, maybe they can pull some of that money back if he ends up on the bench behind an Emory Williams. There's just so many different ways that this could go, good and bad, that I think is what makes this so fascinating, because there's not really one road or one pathway to success now with the opening of NIL, especially at schools like I just mentioned, Miami, or you mentioned Louisville, who now have fairly wealthy backers behind them. And Louisville, for people who don't know, is a very connected to Adidas school. Adidas makes a lot of money a year. They want to shell out some money to bring some players there. They can. So it really could open up things for college football and more college football teams in the future.
And the next thing I'm going to bring up is actually someone that's watching. Gator J brought it up, and I'm about to bring it up. So this has happened more in basketball so far, but players coming back to school rather than declaring because of the NIL money. So do you think there are going to be players that stay for 4 years? I don't think it's going to be first round guys, but maybe the fringe guys that are 3rd to 5th round, they might stay an extra year. Do you think that might happen?
I do. And I do think it's more of the guys you just mentioned. I've seen people having these discussions and be like, oh, well, if Bijan's making $5 million at Texas, why is he going to go to the NFL if he's going to end up being a high-end second-round pick and that pay is $3 million? But guys, he's not staying at college an extra year for $2 million. You're going to go to the NFL. I don't think anybody first round, second, third, anyone day 1 or day 2 likely is not going to go, I'm coming back to college. I could see some of those quarterbacks. I'll use Will Levis as an example. There's a lot of rumors, and there was a lot of in your window last year that he had a second round draft grade. maybe if he came out last year, he may have been pushed up into the first round. Like none of us, myself included, think expected just Kenny Pickett to go in the first round. I thought at least 2, maybe 3 quarterbacks would go. We didn't see that happen. So would a guy like Will Levis maybe stay an extra year? I think it's those quarterbacks who are on the fringe maybe of round 1 decide to come back to see if they can improve their draft capital a little bit more. But outside of that, I'm with you. I think it's more of those round 4 later guys that know they're not going to get the high end money, but they're like, okay, well, my NIL deal here is getting me $1 million. I'm just going to stay here. But again, I just don't see a point personally where a player is going to be making like $15 or $20 million a year off their NIL deals in college to say no to the NFL. I just don't think we're ever going to get to that point. Like, again, I know the reports for some of these guys have been upwards of close to $10 million, but I bet you that's not a year. I would bet at the end of the day, if this stuff does become public, we'll find out, okay, what was this much money over the length of a 3-year contract or something like that. So I do find it hard to believe that any top-end guys who get good draft grades would decide to come back to college just to get an extra $1 million or $2 million a year. Because, again, with signing bonuses and everything else, you're going to make more money at the end of the day on the NFL level. And you want to get to free agency sooner rather than later as well to get that money.
I definitely agree. And I have seen people talk about Bijan like that. And I don't see that happening because you want to, like you're saying, you want to get there. And if you're a top-end athlete, you want to prove yourself at the next level. So I think that's definitely, and I think a lot of these numbers are probably closer to what you were talking about with CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. I know JJ McCarthy got maybe, between like 250, maybe 500,000. I think it's in that range, probably over 100,000 upwards to $1 million. I know a lot of players are kind of getting those type of numbers. So we're not just talking about these freshmen coming in with transfers. We saw it big with Jordan Addison leaving Pittsburgh to go to USC, and there were reports that Zay Flowers said that some people approached him and he decided to stay at BC. So I just wanted to bring this up. So for smaller schools that have to play players right away because of the transfer portal and they'll leave if you don't play them, they're in a bad spot because they have to play the players. But if they are successful, then those bigger schools will come and swoop them up. And we've even seen that at Pitt, a Power 5 team that just won the ACC last year. They got USC came in and swooped up Jordan Addison. So what do you think those kind of teams, middle of the road teams, are going to do? Or are they just going to have to just roll the dice and just play the players and hope that they stay? Or how do you think they're going to address that going forward?
That's an interesting question. I really don't know what they're going to do. I will say that I think schools like USC are probably doing it the way I would do it. While having a freshman and getting them paid as much money as some of these freshmen are is a really good thing and a really cool thing. I think if I'm a coach, I'm going after transfer portal players because they've already proven what they can do on the field. Like, I like some of these freshmen. We don't know that any of them are actually going to be any good at all. And we're paying them millions of dollars. We have no idea. Not to say that anybody is going to do this on a work ethic thing. Do we know that one of them may not turn out to be Jamarcus Russell on the college side of things, make a bunch of money, and then just maybe not put in the work? Where on the transfer side, like we've already seen these guys get that produce on the NFL college level, like a Jordan Addison has. For the smaller schools, I guess I'd equate it almost to like a baseball thing. You look at the Tampa Bay Rays or Cleveland Guardians this year who don't have massive payrolls. I think they're going to pick and choose who they're going to pay money to. And maybe they have those conversations like Zay Flowers in Boston College did, where Zay Flowers went to Jeff Hafley, the head coach, and was like, hey, these schools are coming at me and saying they want to pay me this much money. And Jeff Hafley was, thank you for coming to me. We're going to match that so that you stay here. From everything I've heard, Pitt did do the same thing with Jordan Addison. He just chose to go to USC in California. I don't necessarily think you can hate the kid for doing that. Midwest, beaches. I'm going to take the beaches as well, and I'm from Ohio. So I do think that they'll have to pick and choose. A Boston College who may not be able to pay $12 million to put a competitive team on the field like Ryan Day said you have to Ohio State. They may say, okay, well, we've got enough to pay this quarterback and this wide receiver and maybe these couple offensive linemen or these defensive players to kind of keep us somewhat competitive. And then that's how they'll use that money. And if someone comes in and like a running back blows up and he had a really good season, maybe they don't have enough money to pay him. And some other school comes in and says, hey, we want to pay you $5 million. And Boston College is like, hey, do we pay him $5 million or we split up that $5 million to pay like these 4 offensive linemen? I think that's how they'll do it. They'll spread out the wealth a little bit. They'll pay the guys that they want to keep there, a la Tampa Bay Rays, who've paid like Wander Franco, some of their guys, or Cleveland Guardians, Jose Ramirez, trying to pay Shane Bieber. For those of you guys who don't watch football or baseball, sorry, because it probably isn't none of this is going to make sense to you, but I feel like that's the way they're going to attack it is kind of get the guys that they want to build around for those first couple of years and then try and spread out the wealth for these maybe higher end 3-star, lower 4-star guys to kind of fill out a competitive team.
I was just about to interrupt and say, this is not a baseball podcast, sir. So
I'm sorry. I felt like it was very apropos for the argument. I couldn't really think of another way to compare it.
No, I didn't know a couple of the players, but I understood what you're saying. But I do wonder too, kind of like there's been, players said this in the NFL when there are signing bonuses or type of things where they say some of the coaches will hold them back, and stop them from getting those big numbers. So I do wonder if instead of, like a Jordan Addison where they just like force fed him the ball, continually, if they'll get more players, running back wise, say, they'll run through, 2 different backs so they don't get those huge numbers to maybe attract all those different, higher name schools and kind of spread out the production. Do you think that is possible?
It could be. I think for running backs, what you're mentioning, I think is already kind of happening to begin with. I feel like a lot of running backs nowadays, and we've even seen it on the NFL level, just Austin Eckler is kind of the more famous one recently because he actually plays fantasy football as well. He said on that show with, I think it's on Yahoo with Liz Loza, has said, like, I don't want 200 plus carries a year. That's just not good for me, not good for my body. Like, I think Zach Evans has actually said that this year and going to Ole Miss. I don't want 200, 250, 300 carries a year. Like, spread it out a little bit. I think for the running backs, that will definitely happen. Maybe it may not be because of the money thing. It may just be, hey, we're trying to keep these guys a little bit fresh. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see that on like the wide receiver side of things where it's like, you know what, like, maybe we don't want Jordan Addison at Pitt to get 100 plus targets and 100 plus catches so that he doesn't go off and transfer. But I also think at the same time, a lot of these coaches probably, as much as they may think that, I think it would be hard to implement that because I think we all would know the answer to this question. If you're the head coach of Pitt last year, Brandon, it's like, okay, like we can keep feeding Jordan Addison the ball here and then win the ACC and make a big bowl game, or do we pull back in hopes that he doesn't leave us? Like, I think that it's all eventually going to come together and everything's going to be fine, but it's so new. We don't know what anybody is doing or thinking because it's almost become the Wild West when it comes to a lot of this transfers, recruiting, everything now because of NIL.
No, I tend to agree. And in that example, yeah, they were trying to win the ACC. So, they were going to win however they want. Maybe for the smaller schools or any school in general, they just might, recruit positions differently than they would have prior because they figured, they would have some guy for 3 years. So now we'll kind of go into strategies for NIL. And I'll be honest, this whole idea for the podcast is mainly because there's been some, upset people about Michigan, how their recruiting's going. They just lost a 4-star linebacker to Georgia, which I'm guessing had to do a little with NIL also. But came out that Jared Wangler, who is a former player, marketing rep for their NIL space. And I'll just kind of summarize what he said. Pretty much what the university is trying to do, or what they don't want to give the big, $1 million to incoming freshmen. They'd rather give it to, the starting quarterback like, K. McNamara last year, leading them to a Big Ten championship. There's been a lot of talk that's saying that, Michigan doesn't want to pay. And then he was refuting that, saying they want to pay, but they just want to give it to the players that are already there. So that's well and fine. But my question is, if you're not going to pay those freshmen, so you're going to be limited to what recruits you can really get. If all these other schools are paying that. So then if you're doing that, then it's going to hinder, what you're seeing on the field. So in Michigan's case, it took them however many years to beat Ohio State. So it are
Nine.
I was going to say 11, so I'm glad I didn't say it. So it's
I'm pretty
less
sure
than
it was
that.
9. It was 9 or 10, but
Well, they did miss a year, so that goes into
There's
it.
a
So
hope.
no, whatever. So, but I just wonder, because that really limits you if say 70% of college football is going to give those kids that million, then it really limits that recruiting, and you can say you want guys that produce on the field to give them money. So what are your thoughts on this kind of strategy, and do you think teams that have that kind of thought that we're going to wait to pay players can be successful every year?
Man, I hate to actually say this because I just think Jim Harbaugh is a horrible coach, but I actually don't mind what they're doing. It goes back to we just talked about Jordan Addison. If I'm a head coach, if I'm running a collective, I think I'd rather bring in transfer players because, again, they've proven it on the field where, again, you're paying a freshman, Jaden Rashad at Miami. Like, I like him. He's one of my top quarterbacks in the class. He's never thrown a pass on the college football field. We have no idea how good or bad he's going to be for college football and at Miami. You're paying that guy that much money. If he completely flames out when you could have used that money on, say, I'm trying to think of a quarterback who transferred it. Well, they weren't going to get Caleb Williams, but I'll use Caleb Williams as an example. You have a guy like Caleb Williams who's entered the transfer portal, Brandon. Would you rather have Caleb Williams, or would you rather them go get Jaden Rashada or Dante Moore, who's currently in recruiting to possibly get there? Like, I don't think there's a wrong way to do it right now because there's just so much we don't know. Michigan, they had a top 15 class last year. I think they're sitting around 50 something right now. There's still time for them to build that class up, so I wouldn't be too worried about it. Does that mean they don't get this high-end 5-star player every year? Maybe. We've also seen a lot of those guys not necessarily pan out for college or NFL success, so I can't say that Jim Harbaugh and Michigan are doing it wrong. I would personally probably go after transfers more than I would freshmen, and we'll see if that ends up working out for them. Again, if next year they get a couple of the high-end transfers because that's where they're willing to pay the players as guys who've proven it on the field, that could mean immediate success for Michigan compared to guys. If they paid a top, like I'll just use Jaden Rashada again. They go and they get Jaden Rashada. They pay him a lot of money. I mean, there's a chance he's sitting behind J.J. McCarthy for at least a year, maybe 2. And then you've got, we'll just again say $1 million because I don't want to throw anybody under the bus for any kind of money thing. Like, let's just say they're paying Jaden Rashada sitting on the bench for Michigan now for $1 million a year doing nothing. So I think there's, as I said earlier, there's no one pathway to success. As much as I'd love to knock Michigan here, and I would love to, I don't necessarily think they're doing it the wrong way yet. Now, in 2 years, I may say, wow, that was a stupid argument for me. They did things horribly wrong here. But I don't think that we can say for sure that they're handling this the wrong way.
I agree on that part, but my only counter argument would be if they don't go after those transfers and they're just saying they're going to pay, players that they already have in house, then, for like Ohio State that is willing to spend, let's say that $12 million and get all those high end recruits, you're going to need a perfect storm, kind of like this last year when Ohio State's defense was down. Their offensive line wasn't great. Michigan had those 2 great bookends. It's kind of like you need everything to work, and the room for error is so small when you don't get all those high-end recruits. I know not all of them pan out, but the more you get, the more likelihood that, a couple of them are going to be good.
Michigan's going to need the perfect storm to beat Ohio State like any year. So, no, I do agree with what you're saying there, and I think what would worry me more on that part is outside of, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, and I don't know why, but I completely forgot his name. No, Hutchinson and David Ajabo should have been a first-round pick too, so I'm going to put him in the conversation. Outside of those 2 guys both being developed into first-round picks on the defensive side of things, Michigan hasn't really developed that much talent over the past couple of years. They've not been putting a lot of players into the top end part of the draft, right? So I think that would honestly scare me a little bit if I'm a Michigan fan, because if you've got Harbaugh here, we're going to pay our players and we're going to develop them to then get paid. You haven't really developed anybody. So, like, are you just going to be paying a no offense, Cade McNamara, who at best is a middle of the road college quarterback. Like, I do get your point there, because regardless, you bring in these 5-star guys, it's at that point your job to develop them, whether it's just to your game to produce on college or help them get to the NFL, whatever. So I do get your point on that, and it could very much end up hurting them if they don't get somebody. But again, there's just a lot of 4 stars that they could go get. Doesn't necessarily have to be 5 stars, but it's going to be interesting. We won't know the real answer to this for probably 2 more years, right?
Yeah, and recruiting-wise for Michigan, I'm not panicking yet. It is a little disappointing after the year they had that they don't have more momentum. But if they win, even if they don't beat Ohio State, if they win, 10, 11 games, they'll be fine recruiting-wise. And to your developing talent question, they've done pretty well on defensive linemen. Kwity Paye was a first-rounder. Rashawn Gary was a first-rounder. I would say defensive line, they've done a very good job. But outside of that, you're right. They've gotten a lot of middle-round guys drafted, but not necessarily those, especially on the offensive side of the ball. It's definitely been a disappointment. So that's enough on that NIL money. Now let's talk about conference realignment. First thing I put on here, geography doesn't matter anymore, as we've seen with, USC, UCLA coming over, and, Oklahoma and Texas going to the SEC. Been a lot of talk about super conferences. Do you think there's just going to be 2 super conferences, the Big Ten and SEC, or do you think them, maybe the Big 12 and Pac-12 or ACC or whatever can kind of put together another super conference?
I think we're going to get 3, if I had to guess. I personally, maybe this is just me being old school, I don't know. I'd hate for it to just be the Big Ten and SEC. I think even if we expand to, a lot of the rumors were they were going to go to like a 12-team playoff kind of thing. If you're really only getting 6 teams from 2 divisions, like, to me, it's still going to be great. I'm still going to love college football, but I feel like that takes some of the fun out of it. I do think there's a shot we get to a Big 3. We've got the Big 12 now. A lot of rumors are they're trying to get like 6 of the teams out of the Pac-12. Arizona State, Cal. Like, well, those aren't really necessary. Utah. Well, like, Utah is probably the best out of that group. I still think that ends up being a very good conference in the Big 12. Like, I still think Cincinnati's a good team. TCU's had some decent success. Baylor was really good last year. The Big 10. What's going to be interesting, I don't think it's going to be the ACC. I would not be surprised if the ACC is going to be dismantled here fairly soon. And what I mean by that is a lot of the rumors right now is the Big Ten is waiting to make a move because they want Notre Dame. Like, that's who they're going after. That's their golden goose to bring in there. If they get Notre Dame, then they're likely going to bring in 3 other schools with Notre Dame. You can't bring in odd numbers. It's got to come in pairs, right? That's why UCLA and USC came together. It's pairs together. So a lot of the rumors are if they get Notre Dame, they want to get like a North Carolina out of the ACC. And then maybe that's when they get Oregon and Washington, who have both applied for the Big Ten, but they've kind of put them on on waiting status. They haven't necessarily approved them yet. I think we'll get to a point, as I mentioned, though, that it'll be 3 big conferences. And this is what I meant earlier with the NIL. I think having some kind of real, not I will say limitations, but some kind of payment structure put in, like a rookie contract in the NFL, is at that point, I think they can break away from the NCAA and just have kind of their own rules for football. They'll still be a part of the NCAA in some ways, whether it's governing the Olympic sports, the other sports that maybe don't make as much money. But football is kind of governed by these big conferences. Maybe they have some kind of actual commissioner, and they just kind of have these schools do their own thing. And that is where I think things will change. We'll see some kind of, again, I would compare it to a rookie contract in the NFL, because we saw back in the day, I mean, there was at one point in time, Sam Bradford was getting paid $75 million as a rookie in the NFL, not ever doing anything. And I think that's where we're kind of heading right now with NIL until it gets put in place. It's going to be interesting. I think a lot of this stuff is going to come to a head in 2024, because right now, what is it? USC and UCLA will join the Big Ten in 2024. All the rumors are Texas and Oklahoma will then do the same thing. They'll buy out. I think they've got like 1 year left or 2 years left on their contract at that point to go to the SEC. And then I think we'll also see playoff expansion at that point. I don't think there's any way if we're going to have Texas and Oklahoma in the SEC and UCLA and USC now in the Big Ten, these massive conferences already, and then you're only going to put 4 teams in the playoffs. So I think that's really within the next year or so, I think we're really going to see some really big shakeups in what the college landscape is going to look like moving forward. But I expect 3 power conferences.
Well, that'll be interesting. Let's talk about that real quick. So if there's 3 power conferences, what do you think the expansion would look like if there's, say, 3 super conferences? Would they just expand to 8, or do you think they'll move all the way to 12?
I would not be surprised. So, I mean, what do we got right now? It's 16 technically, right, in the Big Ten, if I'm doing my math correctly here. And again, there's rumors that they want to add up to 4 more, so they could go to 20. And I think if they go to 20, there's no way in hell the SEC is not going to do the same thing. So I do think you could realistically see a shot of like 3 conferences with 20, so 60 teams altogether. And then I wouldn't be surprised if there is a 4th conference, but maybe it's not as big. I mean, you still got the AAC out there with some decent teams in it. What's left of the ACC? Because if you take 8 teams out of the ACC, they're kind of screwed. They still have some decent teams. Like we just take those top couple lines, right? Boston College, NC State, Clemson, Pitt, North Carolina, Duke. Because I think if North Carolina goes anywhere, Duke's coming with them because of basketball-wise, because you're going to bring the sports together. So I think North Carolina, Duke may be tied together wherever they go. So if you just take those 8 schools out, you still have Florida State, Georgia Tech, Louisville, Miami, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, Syracuse. While they may not necessarily all be powerhouses, those are still some pretty brand names there. So regardless if it's just a 3, maybe we do see a 4, but it's considered like I'm trying to think of what was Pac-12 the past couple of years, because they've kind of been considered as like they're a Power 5, right? The past couple of years, but they've really kind of been like the low end of the Power 5. I don't think we get much past 20, though. Looking at it, I'd be very surprised if we get to like 24, 30 team conferences. At that point, I mean, like, what are we doing? That's a little insane. I think 20 is probably the max. You've got 16 in the Big Ten and SEC. So maybe they go out in the next couple of years. Again, I think the ACC is likely going to be next that gets pillaged. They'll take some of those schools out of there, and they both get to 20. And then the rest of whatever the Big 12 gets those schools, I think that was 6 or something like that. They talked about taking from the Pac-12, and then maybe they fill out the last couple spots with some other teams. And we get 3 really big 20 team elite conferences, and then we'll see what happens with the rest of the teams.
Yeah, I definitely think the Big Ten and the SEC are looking to get to 20, but I want to kind of talk about, what are some of these marquee teams that we think might go to those conferences in a minute. But if they both go to 20, then if you look at the remainder, I think in the next couple of years, it's really important, even before they move, for the Pac-12 and the Big 12 to, other than the Texas and Oklahoma and USC, those other teams to play well to warrant even the thought of a 3rd super conference. Because if not, like if, say Oregon starts falling on their face and, Cincinnati's middling and, or whatever, and Oklahoma State can't really, keep it going, then it's a lot of mediocre teams, and I don't even know if they would want to keep that as a super conference. So I do think that's going to be interesting the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing too, right? Like, I think we could make the serious argument. We're both Big Ten guys. It's really been the SEC and Big Ten that's kind of been the dominant conferences for the past years anyway, right? Like, yes, the ACC got a couple national championships with Clemson, but if we're also being honest with ourselves, Clemson is not a powerhouse the ACC is not a powerhouse conference. It's Clemson. I have not had anybody else make it even into the playoffs. It's been the Big Ten and the SEC. The Big 12 did get Oklahoma in a couple times. They were knocked out in the first round. So I would not be surprised if those two do get to 20 and then the Big 12 takes some of the Pac-12, some of the ACC to get up to 20. I still think they'll be considered a super conference, but then we may just look at them and be like, okay, like, again, if we use the 12-team playoff format, great. We know that, like, whatever, all these teams coming out of the Big Ten and SEC, they're going to be the favorites. And if Baylor and Cincinnati and let's just say Wake Forest goes from the ACC to Big 12 and they make it into the playoff as well, it's like, all right, I mean, they probably don't stand much of a chance. They're probably going to be like the 10, 11, and 12 ranked teams going into the playoffs, but they're still there. They're in the dance, which matters because that means they're going to get TV money and all kinds of other stuff. So they'll be looked at like we've kind of looked at the Pac-12 since the playoff era started, because outside of getting Oregon in, which was a great run, but people may have forget about that. They did get to the national championship and got beat by Ohio State. And then the only other team, if I'm remembering correctly, that made it in was Washington, who got just destroyed by Alabama in the first game. And then since then, they haven't had anybody make it in. They've kind of been the forgotten about Power 5 conference. And so I think we would still see the same thing even with these super conferences. Again, I would love if it got to 4, because my biggest fear with all this stuff is one thing we have not talked about this entire time is what happens with all these group of 5 teams right now. Because there's a lot of really fun teams to watch. There's a lot of really fun schools there. Do we see schools get to a point where they may not even have football programs anymore because they're not considered into anything? Like, do we start losing stuff? Like, that is honestly one of my big fears with all of this stuff. So the more super conferences, in my opinion, the better, just because I don't want to see anything going away on the college football landscape. Because like, I like watching, I understand I'm sick in the head, right? Like, I'm not everybody's going to sit down and like, I want to watch Tulane on a Saturday, or I want to watch, Western Kentucky light it up with this offense. Like, I like watching as much college football as I can. And I do worry a little bit with these super conferences if they just go and focus in on these like 3 big super conferences and these 60 teams. Like, okay, but what happens to the other 71 schools? Right now we have 131 schools in college football. What happens to the other 70 schools? Like, do they just form their own conferences and they have like a second tier kind of championship? Like, if we put this in a lot of people talk about this possibly going into like a Premier League type thing with what EPL, Champions League, all this stuff for anybody who watches soccer. Like, do they just become the championship, the second level of what the English Premier League is, and they just compete for this? Is there a relegation type thing like a lot of people talked about? 5 of the lower teams in these conferences get knocked down and those 5 come up. Like, there's so many different ways this could go that I'm just very intrigued to see what happens next. Like, I need 2024 to be here because I want to stop speculating and I want to know what this new landscape looks like.
All right, Matt. I mean, baseball and now soccer. I mean, I have to draw the lines.
I'm a man of the people. I'm a man.
No, but I am in a C2C league that does relegation like that. So it'll be interesting about that part. But you kind of brought it up. If there is 3 super conferences, maybe even if there's 4, I think it might be everyone else. They do their own, playoff or championship, and I think that might be part of it. And because I have a couple of friends that are big USF Bulls fans, and they pretty much say we're screwed because like we're never going to get invited to the party, but we still need something. And I still think there's enough money in football for something like that, like a second tier playoff, obviously. But let's face it, a lot of those teams have no chance to get in the playoff now. So it's not really that different.
It's not, but I'll use, going back to the baseball, but different form of baseball, college baseball, right? They just finished up their World Series, and Ole Miss was the last team in, and they ride it all the way out to win the World Series. They knocked out the number 1 team, which I believe was Tennessee. They beat Oklahoma in the championship, which was the top, I believe, 5 team, if I'm remembering correctly. While I get 99% of the time, we want to see the best team win, whether it's Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, whoever at that time, right? Texas, Oklahoma, whoever the best team is at the time. You can't tell me that I'm trying to think of if we're just using a team off this list because they likely make a super conference, right? If a Texas Tech makes it in as if it's just 12 teams, a 12 seed, and they go on a run, a la the New York Giants did multiple times to win the Super Bowl, including knocking off the undefeated New England Patriots, that still wouldn't be somewhat exciting, right? You may not want to see that every single year, but if it happens once every 8, 9, 10 years, like that's still going to be exciting. It's still something you're going to talk about. So I want to see that kind of stuff. And what you just mentioned with USF, like, that is where I do think the relegation thing would be a lot of fun, because if, say, Nebraska, I'm just going to pick 3 teams out here. So, like, if West Virginia, Nebraska, and Rutgers. Sorry if you're a fan of any of those teams. I'm not trying to say you're horrible. Just going to use you as an example.
Rutgers is who I was thinking when you started it. I was like, say Rutgers.
We're mind melding here. So yeah, again, not that we think Rutgers is bad. We're just, just throwing them out there.
They're bad.
I'm not going to say that. Rutgers fans, I love you. If they're at the bottom, right, and like they're coming up to the last couple of weeks, and again, just like English Premier League, Spanish, all these European leagues, you need wins or you're going to get relegated. That's going to make those last couple of games of the season really exciting. You're going to have people who are not necessarily Rutgers fans, but maybe you're a USF fan who is in the lower division. All of a sudden, you're tuning into Rutgers games. She's like, I need Rutgers to lose because USF has only lost one game this year, and they're about to get promoted to the big dogs and be in the big league. Are they going to lose? Like, I need Rutgers to lose, or I want this team to lose. And so I do think that there could be some very added excitement to some of those lower games if they go that route. Whether they do or not, maybe that's just pie in the sky for some of us who know how some of that works, but I do think that could be a realistic possibility in the future.
I just, that would be fun. What you just mentioned would be crazy fun. I'm sure the networks would love it, but I just never see them allowing, those conferences allowing that, even though, say like, Michigan or Michigan State, or probably would never have that happen. In the little percent chance that it would, they wouldn't want that. So that's a big part. And it's a rumor. I don't know how, true it is, but there's a rumor that Virginia, North Carolina, FSU, and Clemson are rumored to go to the SEC, already talking about that. I find that weird that Virginia is included in those four.
Someone's got to lose games, right? I mean, you can't have the way I look at this, you can't just have the best of the best in every division, because not that this would happen to Alabama, but I'll use like a Florida or Auburn, teams that have been good. Your alumni base and your school is not going to allow you to go 8-4 or 6-6 every year because your conference is so loaded. I hate to say it this way, but you're going to bring in a Virginia, you're going to bring in a Rutgers, you're going to bring in a USF, a Stanford. You're going to bring in these schools that aren't necessarily that good at football because you need someone to lose games. You need someone to not necessarily be the best of the best. Now, will that always be Virginia? Probably not. But you can't just have Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, LSU, Georgia, Florida, all in a conference together, because you're just going to beat up on each other, if that makes sense. So I do think they're going to bring in schools like that. And I think SEC, ACC makes the most sense, because one thing a lot of people may not know is ESPN holds the rights to both of those conferences right now. And the ACC buyouts are absolutely ridiculous. They signed one of the worst TV deals of all time a couple years ago. They're locked into it to, I believe it's 36, maybe 26 or 36. It's one of those two. So they're locked in for a long time. I do think there's a chance that those teams are able to leave to the SEC without necessarily paying massive buyouts, because Disney and ESPN now owns a lot of the rights to the SEC stuff. So it's just kind of helping themselves and seeing that transition go. But I think a lot of that is just, like I said, it's you can't have all the best teams in one conference, because if Virginia, like I'll just use Miami, who has a chance to be better, right? With the way they've been recruiting and everything. If you bring them over to the SEC and they're beating Alabama and Florida and Georgia, but then they lose to like Kentucky, Louisville, and Texas, that doesn't help your conference out if all of your best teams have a couple losses on their record. So you want to bring in a Virginia, because it's like, yeah, they may beat Mississippi State and Tennessee and South Carolina, and that's fine because none of those teams are going anywhere. But we don't want them to challenge Alabama most of the time. The year that they do it, we're going to be talking about and celebrating it, upset of the century, right? But you don't want to see that every single year.
And I guess Virginia is probably similar level to when they took Missouri. I think the Big Ten would probably want Virginia more than the SEC, or the Big Ten would fight for Virginia just based on the Big Ten has, they have the higher end, academic schools. They have the restrictions on what can come in or not. So I think that, obviously we talked about Notre Dame. So let's go ahead and talk about this. I would think Florida State, Clemson would be definite ones the SEC wants to get. I would maybe, some of the Carolina schools. When you brought up Washington, I had heard a rumor that the state is trying to make some sort of restriction that Washington can't leave without Washington State. And I don't think the Big Ten would take Washington State. So that might limit what Washington can do.
Yeah, I would think not. What's going to be interesting for this is a lot of the other rumors that I've heard, and if this happens, it's going to kind of, I think, put Oregon out in the dark, which sucks. I actually would like to see Oregon in the Big Ten. If they get Notre Dame, which I think they're right now the big key to everything. We don't know where Notre Dame's going to go. Everybody wants them because they not only have very strict academic standards, they also are a cash cow. They are the one team left right now that will bring a influx of cash into whatever conference they go to. So if Notre Dame goes to the Big Ten, I would not be surprised if then you see Stanford, who does have the education stuff as well, right? And that brings in another team from the Pac-12, which helps kind of USC and UCLA. And then I do think the other two teams will be North Carolina and Duke. There's a lot of smoke around about the Big Ten wanting North Carolina. And just because of the rivalry with Duke, again, both very good with academic standards as well, the basketball stuff, like I would not be surprised if, as you just mentioned, with Washington and Washington State probably being paired together based on the law that's going in. I kind of feel like if North Carolina goes somewhere, Duke's coming with them because they do not want to lose. That's one of those rivalries. That's an Alabama Auburn. That's an Ohio State Michigan. You don't want to ever lose that. So I would not be surprised if we don't see Oregon being the team that's kind of left out in the dark here on that side of things, because if Notre Dame does go Big Ten, which I think is the best fit for them, but if they go SEC, I get it. I think Big Ten's the best fit for Notre Dame. We could see then a Duke, North Carolina, Stanford go to Big Ten, and then you're left with everybody else trying to figure out what they're going to do.
This has been rumored before, but I've kind of heard a couple more rumblings about it. I know a few years ago there was talks about Kansas kind of going there, for the basketball and this. And kind of like you're saying, you need someone to beat up on. I mean, Kansas was better last year. They did beat Texas, but that could be a team also. But I don't think it'd be the worst thing if, say, Oregon gets kind of meshed in with the Big 12 because, they could run that run that conference if there is a fourth or a third super conference. So to kind of end our talk on the super conferences, what do you think this does for recruiting? Because, with US, if it just stays USC and UCLA, do you think it helps them get some of that, in Big Ten country, or do you think it helps the rest of the Big Ten teams get more of that West Coast?
I think it's going to be a little of both, and I hate to just give that answers. I feel like that's a cop-out, but there have been talks that the reason USC and UCLA didn't want anybody else coming from the Pac-12 is because they feel like now them coming to the Big Ten, which is a more recognizable conference than the Pac-12, they feel like that's going to help them lock up California. The big thing is, and while it hasn't been many of them, Ohio State and Penn State have gone out and gotten players from California. So I think this only goes and helps them now too, right? Because now they're traveling. The big thing for all these recruits is, well, I don't want to travel cross country from, Los Alamitos, California to Columbus, Ohio, because I'm never going to get home to play in front of my family. That changes now. So I think this only helps Big Ten teams. Now, will it help all of them? Probably not. Nebraska's probably not going to get any better luck recruiting in California than they have in the past. But I do think it helps at USC and UCLA if nobody else comes over, kind of lock that up. Recruiting-wise, I don't think it changes much overall because I still think NIL is going to play a part in that. Obviously, we've had that discussion already. And I just think that it will help. My hope is at the end of the day, it will help level out some. Obviously, being an Ohio State fan, it's been great seeing like nothing but all these 5 stars and whatnot coming to Ohio State. But I honestly would not love nothing more than to see more and more teams getting these high-end recruits and seeing more and more competitive football at the college football level, which is my hope is what all this realignment and NIL is going to do for college football.
Sticking with the Big Ten, Who do you think it hurts more traveling to the other, so the California teams traveling to, say, Michigan, Ohio State, the cold weather, or the Big Ten schools traveling out west? Who do you think would get the better advantage, in those home and home type situations?
I think the Big Ten right now. And I say that not because I don't think UCLA and USC can handle the travel, but let's say Purdue, Rutgers, Wisconsin, Penn State, and Iowa have to play UCLA and USC, right? But it's one of them. They only have to make that trip once. If USC's got to play 3 of those, they've got to do that trip 3 times in 1 year and then they only have UCLA, which is again why I was hoping an Oregon and Washington or Oregon, Stanford, whoever, 2 more teams from the Pac-12 would go into the Big Ten to make it a little bit easier on those 4 schools, because that is a trek over there. Again, I believe someone said Chris Moxley, I think, retweeted this, like the flight from Rutgers to use USC is the same flight it is from like Rutgers to Iceland or something like that. Like, it's not an easy flight. It's lengthy. And granted, I get that these teams travel on charter jets, and it's not like they're driving on a bus across country, right? But still, anybody who's flying or flown across multiple time zones and everything, like, jet lag is real. And when you're going from a time when you're used to playing at, say, 12 o'clock noon your time in California, and then you're going out to the Big Ten multiple times a year and you're playing at what is then 8 o'clock your time, it's a little bit different. Your body clock is not used to it. It may take you a little bit longer to get woken up. So I feel like it's going to hurt right now UCLA and USC more, because they're going to have to make that trip to Big Ten country multiple times a season, compared to an Ohio State or Michigan, who, if they're playing only USC that year, they're only making the trip once. And then more than likely, if they're smart, they'll schedule themselves a bye either before or after that game. And then you're not worrying about it anymore. It's just like when Oregon came to the Big Ten this year to play Ohio State, or anytime they've traveled out there or anywhere to play those teams. So it definitely right now, in my opinion, hurts the USC and UCLA.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that aspect, but yeah, that's totally true. So, I think we talked NIL Super Conference to death in this hour. So, Matt, thank you for joining me. And for anyone that's listening, if you don't follow Campus of Canton or don't subscribe to them, you definitely should. Everyone should get in the C2C League, go from Dynasty to Devy. And the next step is C2C. So they have, great videos, great shows, great guides and everything. So I just wanted to plug that for them. And thank everyone for tuning in, and make sure to subscribe to the IDP guys. We have a lot of good content coming out, daily videos about sleepers, busts, offenses, and defensive. So make sure to subscribe.